Hi everybody, in this video we're going to learn all about how to generate a random color and use it in our projects to specify a random color that can be used in anywhere CSS can be applied. It could be a foreground color, a background color, border color, whatever. It's going to be a lot of fun, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, the way I'm going to structure this video is by primarily spending the time looking at how to use a set of predefined functions I've already created and how to use random colors. So to go into much bigger detail in terms of what the code looks like and how the code is structured and all the details of the code itself, I highly encourage you to read the larger article called Generating Random Colors on crypto.com, which I've also linked to in the video description below for that level of detail. In this video, we're going to keep it pretty focused and learn how to go from I need a specified color to how that color you specify be randomly generated using the code that we already have. And so we're going to be more focused on that and less on the more theoretical academic kind of exercises, which is a lot of fun, and I do encourage you to check that out as well. So picking a random color, picking a color. Let's start with that. We pick colors for a variety of things to represent something that we want to display on our screen. That seems kind of obvious, right? You might have a style guide, you might have some colors you picked from a palette generator like coolers.co or Adobe Cooler or any of those other websites that generate palettes for you, or you might be just kind of winging it, picking a color on the fly by using a color picker that exists in your code editor, or as the case of what I'm showing on screen right now, the color picker that exists when you access a color value in the Chrome DevTools. In this case, this is the color picker that showed up when I was in the CSS panel filling with the color value for something. And so when we specify color that's kind of predefined, we have an idea of exactly what we want, and that's what we ultimately pick. Now, there will be situations though where we don't want a predefined color. You might have a more casual or more fun kind of a situation. We're creating an effect that you have an app that cycles through different colors and themes of colors, or it could be a situation where really the best color is one that is randomly chosen for you by our browser or by our web engine in this case, and not by us. And that's what this video is really going to dive into, is if we had to generate a color randomly, what are some of the best ways of being able to do that? Now, to get started, there's just two things you need to keep in mind. Is first of all, well, actually three things. The first one is this video. This video is going to talk about how to use the cool techniques we have for generating random color. There's a JS file. You may want references in your project, crypto.com/js/randomcolor.js. You can reference the script file directly, or you can open the script file and copy and paste the content. It's not a lot of code. It's probably just a few dozen lines of code, so not too bad. And of course, the full article that goes into much greater detail on the behind the scenes thinking on why these colors work the way they do, which is provided here. Go to bit.ly/randomcolors. It'll redirect you to crypto.com where the value and the larger article lives. And so when we think about our generating random color function, there are two functions. There's three on the screen, but only two functions really for getting a random color. One is getSimpleRandomColor. The other one is getRandomColor, which takes 4 arguments. And the last one's a helper or utility function that just returns an HSLA value for the 4 values we specify in terms of the what goes in here. Now, if you're unsure what HSLA stands for and all of those things, don't worry. That's something that I will cover in this video. So to generate a simple random color, if you just want a simple random color with no extra effort on your part, the simple solution is getRandomColor. This function, when you call it, returns a hex value. It takes something from the RGB color space and just returns a random hex value that gives you the color that is mostly random. So here's an example where I create my color object called getRandomColor. It turns a sort of string, and then I assign that value to our background color property on the style object on a DOM element, which I'm referencing as square. And that is all that it takes to just get a random color displayed and appearing on an element. Now, there's a reason why I'm not a fan of this, and the reason is this. The color value that gets generated when you take an RGB value and pick a random color from it is that the value is not really random. And it's not because of any fault of our random function, it's because of just how the RGB color space, red, green, blue, the color space that set of values reside in, it doesn't quite work the way you might think it does. It happens to kind of curve the space in some odd ways, which is a side effect of that color space in general. And what this means is that not all of the colors that we want in the full colors that we can see will be hit evenly. There's a tendency for the colors to be darker and more unsaturated, giving you a slightly washed out, muddy feel. And if that's the effect you're going for, or if it doesn't really matter that if you need like all your colors to be perfectly intense or have an even distribution of colors, this is completely fine. But I do think that there is a better solution here, which doesn't take a whole lot of extra effort for us to fully wrap our head around. And so let's go ahead and look at that solution. And that solution is this. Whereas I kind of had some gripes about the RGB color space, HSLA is another color space, a very widely supported one that allows us to specify the 4 parts that feed into a color that we ultimately want to see. And those 4 parts are the hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha. And now let's just take a quick look at what these 4 properties or these 4 parts actually represent, so that when we're using them later on, you'll have a much better visual idea of what these numbers or what the arguments we specify kind of map to. So let's start with hue. Hue is the actual color that we're going for. Now, the color wheel is something you may have seen if you've ever read books on art or color theory, or you might just seen this randomly floating around various places from posters and things like that. This color wheel is actually pretty important because each degree value on the color wheel corresponds to a color that we really care about. So what hue represents is a degree value that maps to a color at the end of the color wheel. So for example, a value of 0 would be red, a value of, in this case, 225 would be like a bluish green color, yellow would be somewhere in between 45 and 90, probably around the 60 degree mark. So we can use the color wheel as a guide to help us pick the kind of colors that we want. Second one is saturation. This refers to how intense the color appears, and it goes from a value of 0, which is not very intense at all, so it's going to be pretty much a grayscale color, to a value of 100, which means the color we specify for the hue will be represented in all of its full intensity. The next value is lightness. So the way to think about lightness is that imagine you have a really bright white light that you're able to shine on any color. Now, if that light is not turned on at all, it's like turned off, which means it's a value of 0. What this means is that there is no light, which means the color is going to be black. But the value is just shining at full brightness, like, just right in your face. That color is going to, the light will overwhelm anything that's going to be displayed into the color, so it's going to be full white. So to represent the color that we want, you want a value somewhere in between 0 and 100. And you can see in the little color bar here that you can see black is on one end of the lightness value spectrum, and then white is on the other end. And the color we care about is somewhere closer to the middle. So that's lightness for you. The last one is alpha, and it describes how transparent our color will be. A value of 0 is fully transparent, which means that whatever is behind us will just show fully through. And a value of 1 means there's no transparency or full opacity, which means the color we specified, or it's the result of the hue, saturation, and lightness, will be represented with no further modification. So those are the 4 parts that make up an HSLA color. And you can imagine if we had to think about our HSLA as a function, it takes 4 values: hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha, which nicely maps to what our getRandomColor function actually takes as its argument as well. And then the output of this entire function is also worth looking into, because it's not going to be a simple string like in the case of a random RGB value from our simple random color function. It's going to be an object with 5 properties, and it's worth calling out because it influences how we end up using it. And the 5 properties are the hue, H, S, saturation, L for lightness, A for alpha, and then the actual combined string, which we're going to send to any CSS property, which is HSLA value. And we'll see a little bit of that as we start to look into our code. Speaking of which, now that we had a high-level overview of what exactly it is that our various functions do, let's go ahead and jump into our code and actually see how we can use them in real life. And so to help with this, I created a very simple project. Just the big thing to notice is that we have a div element. Its ID value is big square. We have some CSS that kind of specifies how exactly this square looks. You can see it has a border radius of 10, it has a width and height of 200, and a background color of red displayed by default. We have a body element I'm just using to center our element and make sure it's displayed in the screen so you can see everything, including the recording, at the bottom right corner. And the other big part of this is that we have our script where I'm calling https://crypto.com/js/randomcolor.js, the code that all the script that contains the various helper methods and variables and utilities to get a random color working the way it does. So that's our example, nothing too fancy here. Let's go ahead and apply some of the techniques we just saw into both generating a simple random color and then generating a random color that is using the HSLA various values. So let's go ahead and start by, we have our square, we have everything that looks pretty good here. And so I'm going to go ahead and specify the random color, simple random color, because it's simple and easy. So square.style, that background color, equals, in this case, getSimpleRandomColor. Okay, so specify this value. Let me go and refresh the page. Notice that now our color for our square is changing. Every time we see a value, it's purple, yellow, green, purple again, green, and pink, and it just keeps changing color. You can see it over and over again. Now, if you run this a billion times, you'll find that if you plot those billion colors onto the color wheel, not all of them will hit evenly, which is the gripe I had about RGB values as to what they get generated. So for example, if we just take a look at what exactly does get generated by this, console.log getSimpleRandomColor, you'll see that it is an HSL, it is a RGB value. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring up the console and refresh the page. You'll see like a color value, in this case #745, 7C4. Notice that these aren't corresponding to the color you see on screen because I'm calling getSimpleRandomColor one more time. So just keep that in mind if you're seeing a hex value that doesn't quite correspond to what we see up there. So that's what getSimpleRandomColor does. It gets a job done, but I do think that we have a much better way of being able to do this. And so I'm just going to go ahead and clear that out for now. Just comment this line out just so that I'm not leaving everything running with a squiggly line going forward. Now let's go ahead and now use our awesome getRandomColor function, which takes our 4 arguments for hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha. So I'm going to do var. Yeah, it's an old habit. It's actually let hue equals, and because we're generating a random value in this case, we want to specify a range, both a lower range and an upper range. Hue is a degree value from 0 to 360. It's a color wheel. So I'm going to go 0 to 360. And saturation, let saturation equals a value from 0 to 100, because that's the level of intensity we want. Let lightness also be a value from 0 to 100. And let alpha be a value from, in this case, I'm going to leave it from 1 to 1. You can keep it from 0 to 1. Actually, let's go to 0 to 1. Might as well show all of it in terms of the upper and lower bounds, and then we can go from there. All right, so now that I have these 4 values, I'm going to specify my color. Let color equals getRandomColor, if I spell it correctly, and I'm going to specify hue, saturation, lightness, and alpha. Okay, and so let's make sure that this actually does the right thing. Console.log color. Okay, and I like to do this every now and then. Even though I know it's going to work, it's just good to do this as a sanity check to make sure that our values are proper. Oh, alpha's undefined, and that's because I misspelled alpha. Okay, see, here I was thinking that I'm going to show you the console.log as a way of just matter of course, nothing fancy, but it turns out I actually caught an error. Another reason why it's good to do this. All right, you can see the returned value from us doing this is essentially the 5 properties we talked about in our document. H, S, L, and A. It just happens to be alphabetized here. And you can see HSLA value contains a full CSS string of what we ultimately want to display and assign to our CSS. And so I'm going to go ahead and, we're good here. The color values are set fine. So I'm going to do square.style, that background color, equals color.hsla value. And now if you refresh the page, you'll see a color being randomly generated with using the getRandomColor function that happens to be using the HSLA color value. Now, what makes this approach really nice is that, I mentioned it's customizable, and the reason is that we can now customize the lower and upper bounds of all the values we care about. So for alpha, I'm going to keep the lower and upper bound at 1, which means it's always going to be fully visible because in this case, I don't want any transparency. So if I do that, you can see our colors are no longer, faded out. It's actually fully visible unless the color itself is like closer to the white background that we see here. And let's set for saturation that instead of being from 0 to 100, where 0 is black and 100 is pure white, let's clamp it to something more reasonable. Like let's say 50 to 90. And for lightness, something very similar, where instead of it being from going from black to white, we'll keep it, saturation not black to white. Saturation is gray to the full color that it needs to be. So 100 is the full value for saturation that I want. I got lightness and saturation mixed up in my head. For lightness, let's go from, in this case, 50 to a value of 90. So partially visible, but not exactly completely white to the point we can't see anything. Right now, if we refresh the page, you now see that colors are more in the visible range and more pleasant in some ways to look at. And similarly, let's say, for example, that I don't want to have a color randomly picked from my color wheel. I want to clamp it down to, we looked about the yellow color being somewhere in the 60-degree range, then pick a yellowish color, and that would be the 55-degree and 65-degree values. And I got these values from the color wheel. I have no idea where yellow normally would fall on a good day, but if you look at the color wheel, you can see that it falls between that. And so now, if I refresh this page, you'll now see all the values that are being generated, all the colors that are being generated are all within this particular range. Now, here's the thing, gotta do one more thing here. We can go even further. When generating colors, it's often common to want complementary colors or tertiary colors and things like that, which are colors that are adjacent to a particular color that you're interested in. And so, for example, let's say I want a complementary color. A complementary color is one that is on the opposite side on the color wheel. So if you're on one side of the color wheel, draw a straight line in an opposite direction, and you'll be on the other side, and that's the complementary color of it. Or in mathematical terms, it is 180 degrees less than the value that we had dealt with earlier. And so what I'm going to do, the way I'm going to specify this, is that we know that the color object, or the color, in this case, it is an object, gets us an object with 5 values in it, HSLA and the actual value. Now, because we have actually individual colors themselves, we have the ability to do something like this. I'm going to say that complementary color, I hope I spelled complementary correctly, equals, and this is where I'm going to use the getHSLA function, which we saw in the slides but haven't used yet. It's a helper function. It takes the 4 arguments, but it generates a CSS friendly syntax for the color itself. So I'm going to get getHSLA, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get the color value and say color.h. I want the hue value to be exactly what's specified here, but I want it to be 180 degrees in the opposite side of the color wheel. So I'm doing color.h minus 180. Then it's going to be color.s, and then for the rest of it, in terms of the saturation, it's going to be lightness is going to be color.l, and then lastly, it's going to be a value of 1 for our alpha. I mean, I could just put color.alpha, but I chose to just keep it in this case separate. Actually, it's color.hue. I don't know why color.h, sorry, color.h. Let's return object from here. It's been a long day. Okay, and so let's just for kicks, let me make sure to, just like before, console.log complementary color to make sure that I didn't make any embarrassing mistakes, because, given how this particular sample has been going, it very likely has something going on there. Oh, no, never mind, it's good. HSL minus 125, 8963, 1. We're in a good spot here. So I'm going to go ahead and specify the value for background color to be complementary color. Notice that complementary color doesn't return an object, it returns the CSS friendly string directly. So refresh, and you can now see the complementary version of yellow, which is blue, being displayed on our screen. So it's a very handy way of being able to go from a color value, customizing it to clamp on the range of colors you want, to then picking a complementary value or any else thing you want, because hey, we have access to all of that. I can do minus 90, for example, to get another set of values that are going to be corresponding to what we're doing. And so there you have it, a very quick overview of how to use the random colors JavaScript file that contains the 3 helper methods that allow you to generate a random color, or then take a color value and then generate the HSLA values from it. So definitely take a look at this as a very simple shortcut way for you to go from picking a color manually to picking one randomly where your browser does all the heavy thinking for you, if that sort of suits your needs. And definitely, again, I mentioned this, I can't emphasize this enough, do read the article where it goes into more detail on what exactly the code looks like, what it does. It's nothing too complicated or out there, but it's kind of cool to just see how some simple mathematical functions can turn into what we see here, which is an ability to generate a random color really effectively. So if you have any questions about how to use that script, or what colors, or anything web development related, just post in the forums at formatgroup.com, where I and others will be happy to help you out. If you like this video, or if you didn't like this video, tell your friends and enemies all about it. I'd love to hear from others on what they like and don't like, and the more people who know about it, the better off I am in terms of being able to create the kind of content that you all find interesting. Hit subscribe to be notified of new content. Follow me at Krupa on Twitter and other places to be kind of see bite-sized updates on new things or just kind of web things that I'm thinking about at the time. And lastly, if you enjoy reading, especially in paperback and Kindle editions, you have books that I've written that might be just what you could give as a gift or fix that wobbly table that just won't stop wobbling. So you can put one of these books under one of the legs to stop the wobbling. So many ideas there. Be creative, and with that, I will see you all next time.